I was born on soil that remembers. It remembers the names that white ledgers forgot, the mouths that rice water drowned, the babies who never learned the word freedom. On the night the dead first answered me, that soil woke up. The house was bright with music and wine. The big table shone like still water. Then every candle bent at once, as if a giant hand had cupped the flames. And the room fell cold enough to show breath. Glass chimed. The chandelier began to sing like broken stars. I heard them before I saw them. A low river of voices, old tongues braided together, carrying my grandmother's name like a drumbeat. Oya, Oya, Oya. I pressed my conjure bag to my chest. Bone, crossroads dirt, a rusted nail, a curl of baby hair. Not magic to them, trash. To me, keys, ancestors, I whispered. I am tired of begging the living. The mirrors clouded white, then cleared to show what the family would not. Backs striped by whips, children taken at dawn, hands red from husking rice until skin peeled away like bark. Mistress clutched her pearls. Master reached for his Bible. The floor groaned and a woman stepped out of the cold. Copper skin, fire-deep eyes, a dress torn by years. She looked at me, then through me, and the room bent around her grief. Justice, she said. Now, if the law won't hear the dead, will you? If buried history matters to you, subscribe, and comment your state below so I know where you're watching from. 33, South Carolina Low Country. One plantation. One conjure bag. The dead begin to walk. If freedom demanded spirits, would you call them? I came into this world in 1805, beneath the shadow of Spanish moss that hung like mourning veils over Ravencraftoft Plantation. My mother chose a cabin near the old burial ground, though the master called it wasted land. To her it was holy ground. She wanted her child's first cries to be heard by ancestors who had no gravestones, only soil pressed down by centuries of labor and sorrow. When I was born, the midwife said the air grew heavy, as if the walls themselves leaned in to watch. But another voice whispered too, a sound no one else admitted hearing. My grandmother Oya stood by my mother's side, small and fierce, her copper-colored hands resting on a leather pouch tied with twine. She looked down at me with eyes that had outlasted chains and storms, and she said words that would shape my life. This child is not alone. The ground remembers, and it will answer her. The white folks called her a conjure woman. To them, it meant trouble, half witch, half threat. They whispered her name the way people whisper about snakes or storms, with fear laced through every syllable. To us, she was our shield, the one who knew which roots could heal fever, which charms could soften an overseer's cruelty, and which nights the air was thin enough to let the dead walk among the living. From the start, I lived in two worlds. By day, I bent beneath the rice sun, back raw and fingers bleeding from stalks sharp as knives. By night, I sat at Oya's feet while she pressed bitter herbs into my tongue and stories into my bones. She taught me the words of the Gula tongue, the one white folks hated to hear because it meant they could not own the meaning. She would say, "Child, they think they bought our bodies, but they never touched what we carry inside. That power is older than their churches, older than their whips, older than their God." I listened. I believed, and I learned. At 12 years old, I could read signs in the wind. If a crow circled twice, death was near. If dogs barked with no cause, a runaway had crossed the fields. I knew how to knot twine so it would trip a man who meant harm, how to place salt across a doorway so nightmares could not pass. Most of all, I learned to listen to the silence, the stillness that came when the ancestors stood close enough to breathe on the back of my neck. But every gift carried warning. Oya would lift my chin with her bony hand and whisper, "Power comes with price. Never call the angry dead unless the world has left you no other road. They come fast, but they do not leave easy." I thought I understood. I thought wisdom alone could hold me steady. But wisdom is fragile when grief comes, and grief was already walking toward me. 5, South Carolina. A child born beside graves, a grandmother with fire in her eyes, power waiting for its hour. Do you believe land can remember every drop of blood spilled on it? By the time I was 15, my grandmother's teachings had seeped into me like rain into soil. The Ravencraftofts tried to fill our mouths with hymns from their Bible, but Oya's voice reached deeper, curling in the marrow where no whip could reach. We carried two faiths, one forced, one chosen. In the chapel, we bent our heads as Master's preacher thundered of sin and obedience. But when the bell was silent, when the moon washed the rice fields silver, we gathered in whispers. There, beneath the stars, the older words lived. Words that had crossed the ocean hidden in breath and bone. Words that white men feared but never understood. Oya's pouch was never far from her. A little scrap of leather, stitched by hands that had known both freedom and chains. She let me hold it once. Inside, a nail black with rust, a feather plucked from a crow at midnight, a tiny bone wrapped in red thread. Each piece remembers, she told me. Memory is power, and power is the only freedom they cannot sell. She showed me how to grind roots before dawn, how to mix them with spit and ash to make a charm that could turn aside a lash. She taught me that certain trees grew bent because spirits rested there, their weight pressing down even in death. She taught me that dreams were not just shadows of the mind, but letters written by ancestors, folded and slipped into our sleep. There were nights when I woke to the sound of voices outside my cabin, low, rhythmic, like water against stone. I would look through the cracks and see no one, only the moss swaying without wind. Oya said not to fear. That's the ground speaking back, she whispered. The earth knows our names even when the white man forgets. But she warned me too. There were darker lessons, the kind she never wished to pass on. How to send sickness into a cruel man's bed. How to twist luck into rope that tightens with every breath. How to call the spirits of the angry dead, the ones who had died with hatred hot as coals in their throats. She held my face one night, her eyes sharp as broken glass. Saraphina, she said, you must promise me this. Use the gift to heal, to shield, to guard. Never to break. Because when you call down the storm, you don't get to choose what it strikes. I promised. I meant it. But promises are brittle things when tested by grief. And the world was already preparing the test. A pouch of bones. A tongue the master could not steal. A warning. Storms answer no one's command. If you had power to curse or heal, which would you choose? By 19, I was a woman. Though life on the plantation steals childhood long before a girl is ready. My hands were already scarred from rice stalks. My back already knew the whip's bite. But even in a place built on sorrow, love still found me. His name was Jacob. Tall, with shoulders shaped by years of carpentry. He had been trained to craft chairs and mend beams. And because of his skill, the Ravencraftofts treated him with a little more care than they did the field hands. But to me, his true gift was not in wood. It was in sight. Jacob could see what others could not. He told me once, his voice hushed in the dark cabin. When I close my eyes, I can feel them. The ancestors. They circle you like a shield, Saraphina. They wait for your voice. We married in secret, in a clearing the master never visited. No preacher, no ring. Only fireflies and the steady beat of drums tapped softly on overturned buckets. Old Moses said the words. Oya tied our wrists with twine. And the ancestors, I swear, were there in the hush that followed, blessing what no white paper would ever record. 3 children came to us. Kessie, our firstborn daughter, who saw the world the way I did. At 6 years old, she could tell when death was near. She once woke in the middle of the night sobbing, saying, "The air feels empty, Mama." By dawn, a woman in the quarters had passed. Our son Kwame had gentle hands. He could touch a broken bird's wing and calm it until it healed. When a child burned his palm on the stove, Kwame's touch cooled it, as if he carried healing in his very blood. And little Amari, the baby whose laughter could chase away sorrow itself, even the most broken among us smiled when he giggled. The elders said he carried light, the kind that spirits love to follow. We were a family in chains, yes. Our names could be sold like cattle. Our lives weighed against a master's debt. But in those moments, holding Jacob's rough hand, watching my children play in the dirt with joy brighter than any candle, I felt free. Yet freedom on a plantation is a fragile thing. Every smile came with fear that it might be the last. Every day with my children carried the shadow of tomorrow's wagon. And I saw the way Master Jeremiah's eyes lingered on us, not with kindness but with calculation, as if he were already counting the price he could fetch for my blood, my love, my life. Oya's warning echoed in me. Power comes with price, child. Be ready. I prayed the price would never come due. But the world was sharpening its blade, a secret marriage. 3 children born in chains. Love blooming where freedom could not. If every smile might be the last, would you still dare to love? Spring of 1832 brought a shadow that even the brightest sun could not lift. Rice prices fell. Creditors circled. And Master Jeremiah Ravencraftoft, with his fine coat and empty purse, looked to us not as people, but as coins. I was in the kitchen garden when I heard the screams. Kessie's voice, high, sharp, desperate. I dropped the basket of beans and ran, heart pounding like a drum of war. The wagon stood outside our cabin. Iron chains glinted in the light. My husband Jacob, my children, my whole world, already bound inside like cattle. Kessie clawed and fought, kicking against the trader's hands. Little Amari wailed, his tiny fists reaching for me. Gamey sat stunned, eyes wide with terror too heavy for his young frame. "Mama!" Kessie screamed, her voice slicing through me like the overseer's whip. "Mama, don't let them take us. Use your power. Call the spirits." I lunged, but the overseer's lash cut me down. The leather tore skin from my back. I fell face first in the dirt, blood and tears mixing with dust. From the ground, I watched as my family was driven away, Jacob's eyes locking with mine. Full of sorrow, he could not speak. The wagon wheels rolled. The dust rose, and just like that, the heart of my life was gone. On the porch, Master Jeremiah stood, arms folded, face smooth as stone. Not shame, not regret, only the cold look of a man who had solved a problem with numbers. He saw assets, debts erased, pockets filled. Not a mother bleeding in the dirt, not children torn from arms, only property exchanged. In that moment, something inside me broke. No hymn, no prayer, no patience could mend it. The restraint Oya had urged upon me all my life turned to ash. I staggered back to the cabin, the walls echoing with silence where laughter had lived. The burial ground called me, heavy with voices I had tried not to hear. That night I pressed Oya's conjure bag to my heart and whispered into the dark, "Ancestors, the time has come. Justice delayed is justice denied. Take my body, take my soul, whatever price you ask, I will pay it. But let him feel what I have felt. Let him know loss." The air grew cold enough to frost my breath. Spanish moss stirred though no wind blew. And for the first time I felt them answer not as whispers, but as a storm rising from the earth. I had opened a door that could not be closed. A whip. A wagon. A family stolen for debt. A mother's vow to call the dead. If justice cost your soul, would you still ask for it? The burial ground lay quiet under the Carolina moon, a hush broken only by the rasp of crickets and the sigh of the marsh. But I knew the silence was watching. Every unmarked grave held more than bones. It held voices, waiting. I knelt where 4 dirt paths met, the crossroads. In my hands, Oya's conjure bag, worn soft by years of use. Inside rattled the pieces of power. A nail driven through the heart of a lynched tree. A curl of a child's hair, dirt from the graves of the first enslaved here. I pressed it to my chest. My blood dripped from the whip's cut on my back, staining the soil. And I whispered in the gullah tongue, "Ancestors, I am yours. Whatever the price, take it. But let Ravencraftoft feel loss. Let him taste grief as bitter as mine." The ground shivered. The Spanish moss lifted, though no wind stirred. Then came the voices, first a murmur, then a river. Men and women speaking in languages I had never been taught yet somehow understood. Yoruba, Igbo, Kikongo. Tongues carried over the ocean, still alive in the soil. The air grew cold, sharp enough to cut skin. My breath smoked white in the humid night. From the trees, shapes began to move. Shadows that had weight, outlines that carried scars, faces half seen but burning with recognition. One stepped forward. Copper skin, fire-lit eyes. My grandmother Oya, gone years before, yet standing before me whole and terrible. She spoke without moving her lips. "Child, you have called. The price will be high, I will pay it," I said. "Everything they took from me, I demand returned in pain." The spirit surged around me, voices rising like storm tide. The ground beneath my knees turned hot, as though the earth itself had woken in fury. Behind me, the plantation lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a horse screamed. The veil had opened. The ancestors had stepped through, and the Ravencraftoft estate would never know peace again. A crossroads, a conjure bag, A door opened that could never close. Would you risk unleashing powers you might never control, if vengeance was the only path left? 3 days after the summoning, the plantation stirred with whispers that no overseer's lash could silence. It began in the stables. Master Jeremiah's prized stallion, a creature worth more than several human lives in his eyes, was found stiff and cold, eyes wide in terror. No wound, no sickness, just death sudden and absolute. The other horses reared and kicked until they were moved far from that cursed stall. By evening, the mansion shuddered with unease. Mistress Ravencraftoft complained of footsteps in empty hallways, doors that opened and shut, as if by unseen hands. Her children woke screaming from dreams of faces they had never known, dark-skinned men and women whispering words they did not understand. I kept my head bowed, washing dishes in the kitchen, but inside me burned a grim knowing. The spirits had begun their work. Fires in the hearth roared suddenly high, licking at the mantel, then collapsed into smoke without warning. Paintings slipped from walls, their glass cracking across the master's proud portraits. Cold swept through rooms even on sweltering nights, the breath of the dead fogging the air. Thomas, the eldest son, spoke of an old woman who stood by his chair while he read in the library. He said her dress was ragged, her eyes burning with coals of fury. He swore she reached for him, her hand colder than ice though she never touched. Master dismissed it as tired nerves, but I saw the fear in his eyes. Mistress was less steady. "These are not settling noises, Jeremiah," she whispered one night as I poured their wine. "The house breathes with voices." Her hands trembled so badly the glass rattled, and I, the slave in the corner, kept silent. My heart broke with every reminder of my children, but my grief had become a blade, and now the blade was cutting into the master's world. Each night the veil thinned, shadows moved across windows when no one stood outside. Whispers filled the parlor, too low for words, too many for silence. The Ravencraftofts prayed to their god, but their prayers never reached higher than the rafters, because the soil had already chosen who it listened to. A dead stallion, a child's nightmare, shadows walking where no man dared. The haunting had begun. If you saw spirits in your home, would you call it madness or justice? The dead did not stop at the mansion. They walked into the fields where our sweat had salted the earth for generations. At first it was small. A hoe left at the edge of the dike vanished overnight, only to be found days later sunk deep in the mud, too far for any hand to have placed it. Buckets of seed spilled into strange shapes, curved lines, twisted spirals. The old ones among us squinted at the patterns and whispered, "That's writing. The tongues we lost. The ancestors marking their claim." Then came the water. The rice fields lived and died by it. Tides carefully measured, gates carefully timed. But now the water rose when the skies were dry, then drained away in floods when rains poured heavy. One morning, half the field cracked into dry plates. Rice shoots withered like old bones. The next day, another plot drowned so deep the seedlings rotted in their roots. No hand, no tool, no tide chart could explain it. The overseers raged, whipped backs raw, accusing us of sabotage, but fear stained their voices. They saw the footprints too, bare feet pressed into wet earth, whole families of prints, though no slave had walked there. Men, women, children, marching in silent rows across the paddies. Signs of a people who refused to stay buried. The rice refused to grow. Weeds sprouted in wild, defiant clusters. Green letters spelling out words no white man could read. But we knew the land was speaking in our mother tongues again. Visitors came. Planters from Charleston, overseers from neighboring estates. They scratched their heads, muttered about unnatural signs, and left quickly, refusing to sleep on Ravencraftoft land. One whispered as he rode off, "This place is cursed. You should sell before it swallows you whole." But Master Jeremiah was too stubborn, too blind. He tightened his jaw, raised his whip, and shouted louder prayers to a god who would not answer. And all the while, I walked the rows at dusk, the mud sucking at my feet, and felt my ancestors moving like a tide beneath the soil. Every stalk, every root, every patch of earth was alive with their fury. The plantation was no longer his. It belonged to the dead, vanished tools, ghostly footprints, rice fields rising and dying by no hand of man. The land itself rebelled. If the very earth began to fight back, would you call it curse or justice? By autumn, whispers of the haunting reached Charleston. Word spread of crops that died without cause, tools that moved by unseen hands, children tormented by dreams. Master Jeremiah, desperate to restore his name, called for help. Not from overseers this time, but from the church. Reverend Whitmore arrived one gray September morning. Thin as a cane stalk, with skin pale as milk and a Bible clutched like a weapon, he stepped off his carriage, declared the plantation infected by demons, and promised to drive them out in the name of Christ. The slaves were forced to gather before him in the yard. His voice rang sharp, practiced. Brothers and sisters, you are tormented because of sin, witchcraft, conjuring, rebellion against your God-given masters. Confess now, repent, and the Lord will free you. Some bowed heads, some trembled. A few frightened admitted to charms or prayers whispered in secret. The Reverend nodded, satisfied. Then his eyes landed on me. You, he said. Woman, do you invite spirits into this place? I raised my eyes, slow, calm, as the ancestors stirred behind me like a wall of wind. Reverend, I am a Christian woman. I pray, I sing your hymns. If there are voices here, perhaps they are souls who died without rest. Souls who need compassion, not banishment. His lips thinned. He promised a cleansing that night. At sundown, he walked the mansion with holy water, flinging it into corners, shouting scripture. But the spirits were not demons. They were the righteously angry dead, and they answered not with retreat, but with fury. Every candle sputtered out at once. Frost formed on the glass, though the night was warm. Then the voices came, clear, strong, layered. Songs in Yoruba, in Kikongo, in tongues Whitmore had never dreamed existed. The mirrors clouded, then revealed not his reflection, but the truth. Men whipped raw. Women sold crying, children torn from arms. The dining room filled with their faces, ghostly, watching, accusing. Mistress shrieked. Thomas dropped to his knees. And Reverend Whitmore, trembling, cried louder, sprinkling more water. But his prayers fell flat against the storm. One spirit stepped forward, an old woman, eyes burning like embers. Do not use Jesus' name to protect cruelty, she said, her voice shaking the walls. He walked with the broken. He stood with the enslaved. You defend no God here, only power built on blood. Whitmore faltered, his Bible slipping from his hands. By dawn, his carriage rattled away, leaving Ravencraftoft land behind him forever. The church had no answer. The ancestors had claimed their ground, a preacher's prayers. Mirrors of slavery's truth, spirits refusing to be cast out. Faith met fury, and fury won. Whose side do you think God would take? The master with the whip or the slave with the spirits? It began with Benjamin, the youngest son. Barely 12, with curls like his mother's and cruelty like his father's. One night they found him wandering the halls in his nightshirt, eyes wide but unseeing. His small mouth moved, whispering words no one in that house had ever taught him. The Gula tongue, my grandmother's tongue. He walked straight into the slave burial ground, knelt among the mounds of unmarked earth, and spoke as though holding counsel with the dead. Mistress shrieked when she found him, clutching his shoulders. But the boy only smiled and said, Grandmama Oya says you must listen. The tears of Saraphina's children are flooding the fields. The name froze me where I stood. Oya, my grandmother, gone but never silent. The spirits had chosen their vessel, and they had chosen a Ravencraftoft child. By daylight, Benjamin spoke of things he could not know, the names of slaves long dead, the hiding places of charms buried decades before, the cruelties his father thought buried in silence. Papa, he said at breakfast one morning, why did you sell Saraphina's babies? The rice drowns because they cry every night. Master's face drained pale. He shouted, accused me of poisoning the boy's mind, but fear shadowed his eyes. He knew I had said nothing. This was the ancestors speaking through his own blood. His other children were not spared. Thomas, the eldest, woke with his hands bleeding as though he'd worked the rice paddies himself. Martha, the daughter, began to weep in her sleep, calling for parents she never lost, reliving the grief of children sold from their mothers. Mistress, once proud, could no longer eat without tasting hunger, no longer rest without feeling the ache of bent backs. The walls of comfort collapsed around her, replaced with echoes of the quarters. And Benjamin, he grew stranger by the day. He walked with the slaves, humming songs older than the plantation itself. His eyes shone with knowledge that belonged to centuries past. Old Moses, who had seen much in his years, whispered to me, "The ancestors are raising him up. They're putting truth into the master's house through the mouth of his own son." I watched the boy closely, torn between dread and wonder. For the first time, a white child carried our memory, our sorrow, our fire. And the Ravencraftoft family could not escape it. A boy sleepwalking in tongues. Children haunted by grief not their own. The master's bloodline carrying the voices of the enslaved. If your child spoke with the voices of the dead, would you call it madness or a reckoning? Winter came hard in 1833. Frost laced the windows of the big house, though no fire could warm it. The Ravencraftoft family huddled in silence, afraid to sleep, afraid to wake. Every dream was chains, every shadow a face. On the night of the solstice, the air turned different. Heavy humming. The plantation dogs howled until their throats broke. Horses bolted against their stalls. Even the marsh seemed to shiver. I felt it before I saw it. The ancestors gathering. They rose from every corner, the rice fields, the quarters, the burial ground. Hundreds of them, men scarred by whips, women hollowed by grief, children who had never reached 10 years. Their bodies were translucent, but their presence was solid as stone. They formed a ring around the mansion, a wall of spirits that no living soul could break. At the center stood Oya, small and unyielding, her eyes brighter than fire. Her voice rolled like thunder, though her lips barely moved. "Jeremiah Ravencraftoft, you stand accused. You have sold children, broken families, bled the land dry. No court of men will judge you, so we have come." Master staggered from the porch, pulled forward by a force stronger than will. His family followed, trembling, dragged into the circle. Mistress clutched her children, but their faces were blank with terror. Oya's spirit raised her hand. "One choice, Jeremiah. Free every soul you claim as property. Give land, give means, give life. Do this and live your days in peace. Refuse, and you will feel every lash, every grief, every death you have sown." For a moment, silence. The snow white of Master's hair glowed under moonlight. His jaw clenched, his eyes hardened. "I am a God-fearing Christian man," he spat, voice shaking but proud. "I will not bow to demons. These people are my property. No ghost will dictate my house." The circle stirred. Cold swept the yard, burning my lungs like ice. Every spirit lifted their hands together. The sound that followed was not scream, not song, but both. Jeremiah Ravencraftoft bent like a man whipped. His mouth opened and out poured voices, not his, but theirs. "I am Cuffy, who died in the rice fields. I am Patience, who bled in childbirth. I am Marcus, beaten to death for love." One after another, a litany of the damned spilling through him until his knees struck dirt. His wife wept. His children clutched each other, their own screams breaking into sobs. The family of Masters was being forced to feel every pain they had ignored. The ground itself seemed to pulse with the weight of judgment, and I, standing at the edge, felt both terror and triumph. The storm I had called was no longer mine to command. It had swallowed the plantation whole, a circle of the dead. An offer of redemption refused. A master bent under the weight of every life he had broken. If you were given one last chance to repent or be destroyed, what would you choose? By dawn, the Ravencraftofts were shadows of themselves. Their proud estate lay silent but for the weeping of broken minds. Jeremiah withered within weeks. His hair turned white as ash, his body hunched, his eyes vacant. Haunted by every scream he had once ignored. He muttered constantly, slipping between his own voice and those of the dead. "Don't take my babies. Lord have mercy, not the whip again." He died within a year, his heart giving out under the weight of judgment. Mistress fared no better. She could no longer look into a mirror without seeing women who had cooked her meals, cleaned her clothes, birthed her children's food on their backs. She withered into silence, tormented by pain that was not hers, but that she carried as penance. Their children bore marks too deep to heal. Thomas dreamed every night of chains, woke each morning with hands bleeding as though he had worked the paddies himself. Martha grew hollow, haunted by the cries of children sold. And Benjamin, the chosen vessel, was never free again. He spoke in tongues until his voice broke, walking between two worlds, forever tethered to the ancestors who had used his lips to deliver truth. The plantation itself collapsed. Fields refused to yield. Overseers would not return. Word spread of restless spirits, of a land that no longer tolerated the plow. Creditors came, stripped the estate, and sold the property. But the new owners never stayed. The stories drove them away. Windows that shattered without cause, footsteps in empty rooms, cries in the night. Eventually the land was left to rot, its mansions swallowed by vines and silence. For us, the enslaved who remained, the spirits gave freedom in their own way. Some were sold off when debts crushed the family. Others fled in the chaos, finding new lives along the marshes and in towns where the Ravencraftoft name carried only fear. As for me, I lived, but I was not the same. To call down the dead is to step half into their world. My body remained, but my soul walked both realms. I became the bridge others sought. Slaves from distant plantations came to me for charms, for guidance, for whispers from the ancestors. They called me the Conjure woman, a name spoken with both fear and reverence. And when I died years later, they said the marsh sighed, and the Spanish moss lifted as if in farewell. They said Oya's shadow walked out to meet me, and together we faded into the ground that remembers. The Ravencraftoft estate never recovered. To this day, the land stands empty. Tourists and historians come. Some whisper prayers, some scoff. But when the wind runs low through the moss, when night is heavy, they hear it. The footsteps of the enslaved, the voices of the dead, the chant of a woman who traded her soul for justice. Some crimes are too deep for time to bury, and some justice walks long after the living are gone. A family broken, plantation abandoned, a conjure woman turned legend. Do you believe the dead can guard the living until justice is done? I have learned that justice is not a clean river. It carries silt and bones. It stains the hands that draw from it. When I first pressed Oya's pouch to my chest and called the ancestors, I thought I understood the price. I was wrong. Calling the dead is not a visit. It is a vow. You do not open a door for a moment. You move your bed to its threshold and sleep with one foot in each world. I dreamed of my children every night, Kessie with her knowing eyes, Quamie with healing in his palms, little Amari laughing at shadows that loved him back. I wanted Master Jeremiah to taste my grief, and he did. But grief does not return what wagon wheels have taken. The dead can punish. Only the living can restore. That is why the spirits asked for more than fear. They asked for land, for freedom, for change that would outlast our bodies. He refused, and the earth remembered. Sometimes when the marsh goes still and the moss breathes, I feel Oya beside me. Child, she whispers, power is not choosing who suffers, it's choosing what survives. I carry that like a coal I cannot put down. If you walk our fields, watch your step. The ground is crowded with names. Speak softly, leave salt at the gate, and listen, really listen. You might hear the lullaby we sing to the living and the dead alike. We are not forgotten. We are not finished. A door opened. A debt collected. A woman learning that justice is a vow, not a victory. Do you believe true justice changes the living, or only avenges the dead? If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts below, and watch the next buried history we're bringing back to light.